Hi, I'm Sheryl Riley. My husband Doug and I co-author the Duplicate Bridge Club Mystery Series published by Cozy Cat Press. The first book is Killer Lead, and the second book, which just came out, is called Dead Dummy. You can buy both of them on Amazon. I thought I'd take advantage of the nice weather we're having here in Birmingham and do a little reading outside. So thank you for joining me. This is Chapter 1 of Killer Lead. The clap of the Seven Clubs bid card hitting the table felt louder than the train going through the Old Chasm Bridge above Cackanaw Creek north of town, although I knew it wasn't. I glanced from my cards to my right-hand opponent's smirking face. "Your bid, sweetheart," said Clovis with a smile, his bushy mustache twitching. We'd just been skeetered. Clovis Skeeter Jones was known for making wild bids, but also known for succeeding at a few of them. He'd been playing bridge for years, but only recently had moved to town and picked up Duplicate at the Alpine Duplicate Bridge Club. His face was rugged, what some would deem handsome, and his body was muscular from years of working outside in the field raising tobacco, or baccy as Clovis would say. The women in the club whispered and giggled about him, making noises like high school girls with a crush. Clovis had made the rounds, being one of the few eligible bachelors in town of that certain age. In fact, his only real competition for the ladies was Edward Schultz, an elderly attorney we had already played that day. With his full head of white hair and his habit of dressing nicely even on his days off, Edward was the epitome of the Southern gentleman. The two men were complete opposites in manners, if not in looks, yet both seemed to be considered quality catches, although for the life of me I couldn't understand why. Fortunately, Clovis had not yet set his sights on Mamma. Unfortunately, he seemed to have set his sights on me, despite the over 20-year age difference. I ignored the man and studied my hand. More precisely, I studied that annoying singleton 4 of clubs in my hand. It was a quick loser, especially if Clovis held the ace of clubs, and from his bid he almost had to. Mamma and I had only tentatively reached the small slam in hearts, and we were missing one key card. If it was the ace of clubs, and Mamma had a club, we couldn't take all 13 tricks. At this point, there was no way to find out. 7 hearts appeared out of reach. I couldn't risk it, and placed the double card on the table. Disappointment dawned on Mamma's face, but there was nothing we could do. This should have been our board, but Clovis had stolen it, fixing us again. One maxim of good bridge is to take the biggest positive score your opponents will allow, and in this case, that meant setting Clovis on his wild 7 clubs bid. Unfortunately, the positive score from setting Clovis wouldn't match the bonuses we should have gotten from bidding and making 6 hearts. It was a classic Clovis move, one that he was known for. It happened so frequently that I had privately co-opted Clovis's preferred name, Skeeter, to describe the phenomenon. We'd been skeetered all right, skeetered good. My bid was followed by a quick pass on my left. I wasn't surprised. Clovis had bludgeoned Wilhelm B. into being his partner today. Wilhelm was a good player, but not inspired, and certainly not as bold as Clovis. He owned the Pole and Arms, a small downtown shop selling an eclectic combination of gardening equipment, fishing tackle, and guns. The store had always seemed a little strange to me until Papa had explained that all 3 could put food on the table, and in Alpine, where cash was scarce, such an establishment had its own clientele. Wilhelm usually partnered with his wife of 30 years, Ida, but today Ida was playing with her mentor, a more experienced player who could help her improve her play. Wilhelm seemed a bit shell-shocked. Clovis had a way of doing that to his partners. Mamma passed as well. She rarely second-guessed me at the bridge table, although she seemed to question every other decision in my life. Papa and Mamma took me in at the tender age of 8 after the automobile accident that killed my parents. It was a bad time in my life, and if it wasn't for their love and support, I don't know if I would have made it. Later, they taught me to play bridge. My boyfriend, Hank Waderick, and I against Mamma and Papa around the kitchen table on Sunday nights after supper. Papa was gone now, but those Sunday evenings remained among my fondest memories of that time. Well, those and a few more private memories involving Hank. Of course Clovis passed. He'd gotten what he wanted. I was on lead and didn't want to give Clovis an extra trick, so I played that offending singleton club. The dummy was better than Clovis deserved, and when I saw Mamma was void in clubs, I almost threw my cards in disgust. We could have made 7 hearts. Sometimes I hated this game. I heard Clovis snicker and wanted to pelt him. The play progressed, and we collected 4 set tricks. Not enough. "That's down 4, doubled, but not vulnerable, correct?" gloated Clovis. "So that's what, 800 points for you?" I nodded, and the man entered the result into the bridge made. "That should be a top for us, partner. Looks like they can take all 13 tricks in hearts." He looked so smug, I wanted to reach over and rip that annoying mustache off his tanned face. "You made a good bid, Skeeter," replied Wilhelm as he placed his cards in the plastic container in the center of the table. "I believe that was the end of the round. If you'll excuse me, ladies." He stood and I nodded, but Wilhelm was already gone. "It was a pleasure, gals. added Clovis as he stood, favoring his bum leg. He flashed a practiced smile, and I felt my irritation grow when I saw Mama smile demurely in response. The man was a menace. Why couldn't he find another hobby, like bingo? Maybe sometime you'll agree to partner me, Gracie. I have a partner, Clovis, I said, using his given name. I knew he preferred Skeeter, and it was petty, but it was the closest I was going to get to revenge today. As for partnering, I wanted nothing to do with the man, either at the bridge table or away from it. Never hurts to try another. You might find you like it. He waggled his eyebrows suggestively, and the glint in his brown eyes told me he wasn't just talking about the bridge table. When pigs fly, Clovis, for heaven's sake, he was old enough to be my father. The thought made bile rise in my throat. Clovis blinked in surprise at my rudeness. He was used to being fawned over, not shut down. His eyes turned cold, but he directed that smile to Mama, and I swear I heard a sigh escape her. Nora, it was a pleasure. He limped away, and I glared at his retreating back. I needed some air, and a cigarette. I'd quit smoking once before, but when my life fell apart with the event that changed my life, I had picked it up again. I wished I'd never started, but then again, I had plenty of regrets in my 33 years on God's good earth. I knew I needed to put the cigarettes away for good, but not today, not after getting skeetered. We had finished the round a few minutes early. I had time for a quick smoke break. I stood up and turned towards the door. Grace Amelia Thies, you sit back down. How dare you be so rude to that nice young man, scolded Mama. I slumped back into my chair. Mama was like a bulldog with a bone when it came to manners. I might as well hear her out now rather than later. However, that didn't mean I had to like it. Young? Skeeter's what, 55, 56? Her bright blue eyes flashed, her white eyebrows pulled into a frown. I remembered that look from my teenage years. I hadn't been as rebellious as some of the kids in town. Not anything like my childhood best friend Emily, but I hadn't made it overly easy on Mama and Papa either. That doesn't matter. You were still rude. Gracie, you can't afford to be that way in a town the size of Alpine. Word will get around. How will you ever get a man and give me a grandchild? I am your grandchild, Mama, remember? I almost rolled my eyes, but luckily stopped myself in time. It would only make matters worse. You know what I mean. I want to have little ones around the house again before I join your papa. Not now, Mama, I muttered as I stood. She let me go this time, but she was probably just rallying her forces for the next "you need a man" discussion. I really needed that smoke now. I hurried to the central table, where everyone kept their purses and other items during the match. The table was filled with belongings. Bags, umbrellas, raincoats, even a pair of red galoshes, like I once wore to grade school. I had to dig to find my petite handbag, a leather Louis Vuitton I picked up secondhand on the back streets of Paris before the event that changed my life. I finally located it, tucked between the red galoshes and partly under a box of tomatoes that someone had brought to give away. My pack of cigarettes was in the very bottom of the bag and had been smashed by the tomatoes. I know the forecast said rain, but really? The amount of gear collected on the table could shelter a small village from a monsoon. I went around the remaining tables in my path and through the double doors that led out of the building. In seconds, I was outside listening to the construction noise across the street at the old Carlisle Hotel. Scaffolding covered the red brick building, and they had sandblasted the top 2 floors with 3 more to go. The Alpine Tribune said the new owners planned on bringing in some big-name artist to restore the murals that had faded over the years. The town was undergoing something of a resurgence. For years, Alpine had sat unchanging, nestled in a hidden valley on the edge of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Alabama. It had been a wealthy community once, back in the 1830s, when German settlers came planning to farm, but ended up making furniture from the abundant hardwoods instead. Those wealthy days had disappeared with the hardwoods, and in the 1930s, Alpine had entered a period of decline that had lasted for decades. Now Alpine was coming alive, like the fabled Brigadoon in the Scottish foothills. The new game in town was tourism, and a linchpin of that plan was the renovation of the Carlisle. Personally, I would miss the sleepy little town I had grown up in. The wind was approaching for real now, and the gray cloud mass approaching from the west looked ominous. With my luck, it would be pouring rain by the time the game was finished. I wished I had had the forethought to bring a raincoat. I needed to take a lesson from all the older bridge players and bring rain gear whenever there was a single cloud in the sky. However, remembering my purse was about all I could handle after 4 hours of bridge. I turned to shelter my cigarette so I could light it, and a strong gust of wind made me stumble. Before I could recover, I felt a hand on my elbow steadying me. "You okay, miss?" asked a deep voice I had not heard in 15 years. I looked up into eyes grayer than the clouds coming in from the west. They were a bit wiser now, with hints of wrinkles around them. The face was the same, though, and the smile. I knew Hank lived in the area, but I had not seen him in the 6 weeks since I had moved back home. I was not sure I was ready to see him now. Hank, is that you? I feigned. It wasn't as if I didn't already know, but sometimes you have to play games, even if it's just against yourself. Gracie, he laughed. I can't believe my eyes. I never expected to see you here. The words had barely left his lips before his gaze wandered from me to the door of the bridge club. His eyes used to never leave my face, or at least not my body. I was still the same size as in high school, if a bit more filled out in a few areas, and with shorter hair. I had cut my red tresses after Paris in a need to change everything, but otherwise, I looked much like I did back when we dated. What are you doing here? I asked, cringing at the tone in my voice. Sure, I was annoyed, but Hank didn't need to know that. Even after all this time, the man could still raise my ire. Nothing. But his answer was too quick, too clipped. Hank was up to something. I knew him too well. His gaze returned to mine, and his smile broadened. My heart skipped a beat, despite how desperately I tried to clamp down on it. How the hell could he still look so good? It really is nice to see you, Gracie. Are you visiting Mama Nora? I haven't seen her in months, since around Easter, I think. Not visiting. I moved back home for a spell. I giggled. Giggled? I hadn't done that in 10 years. What was wrong with me? I took a deep breath, trying to pull myself together, and continued in a calmer voice. I'm renting a small house over on Elm, across the street from where Jimmy Greasy used to live. You know, the one with the green shutters? I willed myself not to stare into those gray eyes. You've moved back to town? I can't believe it. The last I had heard, you were living in Paris, married to some Frenchman. He looked over again at the bridge club door. Just like the Hank I knew in high school, barging in like a bull in a china shop. Pierre was a pilot. He died 6 months ago in a plane crash. I felt the tears gathering in my eyes, but I refused to cry again. Oh, Gracie, I'm so sorry. I didn't know, replied Hank, and then he gathered me into his arms. I allowed it, inhaling the scent of him and taking what comfort I could. After a few shaky breaths, I pulled away. It was too dangerous to stay there. I looked at the Carlisle to get Hank off my mind and lit a cigarette. Workers were scrabbling along the scaffolding like ants to prepare for the upcoming storm. I took a puff or two to calm my nerves before glancing back to Hank. I was surprised by the look of disappointment I witnessed on his face. When did you start smoking? He frowned and coughed as the wind swirled the smoke his way. It was something that I picked up in Paris, I explained dryly. How dare he judge me that way? He had no right to act all high and mighty with me after what had happened between us. Right. He drew the word into 3 syllables with a fake southern accent and smiled apologetically. I guess he could still read me pretty well, too. I'd better get going. That storm looks like it's going to be nasty. You be careful going home. He looked into my eyes, and I thought I saw regret, but he blinked and the moment was over. Maybe I had just imagined it. I watched as Hank walked away, his shaggy brown hair blowing in the wind. He had gotten a little thicker in the middle and lost some of the spring in his step, but I could still see a remnant of the high school football linebacker I remembered. He got in a beat-up black F-150, but did not start the engine. For some reason, he just sat there, staring at the club. Hank was definitely up to something. I put out my cigarette. I didn't feel like smoking anymore, and the next round would be starting soon anyhow. I entered the club and was surprised to see everyone milling around. Quite a few people were going in and out the back door, and the box of tomatoes had vanished. Most members parked in the lot behind the building, but I preferred the spots along the street in front. Apparently, Gladys Chisholm, the club manager and director for the game, had called for a short break to allow folks to prepare before the rain started. The central table had even more raincoats and umbrellas than before. It looked like a mountain of supplies for hurricane victims more than it did an actual table at this point. I stuffed the pack of cigarettes into my back pocket. It was not worth digging for my purse now. The last round of bridge was uneventful. Our opponents were a pair of octogenarian spinsters, estranged sisters, who had partnered together their entire lives. One would think that after playing together for 60 years, the two would have gotten pretty good at the game, but apparently not. They bickered the entire time, with neither quite knowing what the other was doing. I figured the sisters had remained partners because no one else in the club was willing to deal with either of them. After the game, I stuck around for the scores, while Mama and many others hurried home to beat the worst of the storm. The rain had begun to fall by then, so I knew I was getting wet regardless. Clovis crowed in delight at coming in first, just ahead of Ida and her mentor Edward. Mama and I were fourth in our direction, just out of the points. I sighed, and Gladys wished me better luck next time as she finished counting the money from the game. Most of the card fee went to support the club, but Gladys also received a small portion, as did the national organization that sanctioned the game. Disappointed, I retrieved my purse from the central table and wished again that I had brought a raincoat or even an umbrella. I opened the front door to the club and was hit by a gust of wet rain. I would get soaked getting to my car. "Gracie, don't you have an umbrella?" called Clovis from across the room, interrupting his conversation with Greg Jurgensen. "Let me escort you to your car. We can share mine." "I'll be fine, Clovis." "I insist. No use getting wet when you don't have to," he said, stroking his mustache. I sighed. Mama would want me to accept the man's help. It would be rude not to, and I did have a life to build in this town. I nodded my agreement, and Clovis hurried over to hold the door open for me. The rain was coming down hard at this point, and Clovis's definition of sharing meant using the umbrella while I walked beside him only partially covered. By the time we got to the car, I was soaked. My blue silk blouse clung to me like I had entered a wet t-shirt contest on the Redneck Riviera, more formally known as Alabama's Gulf Coast. True to form, Clovis could not keep his eyes off my chest. I wanted to scream at him to get a good look now, as he would never get another, but my better senses prevailed. I slammed my car door shut and lit a cigarette, thanking him with only a thin smile. Clovis stood there for a minute before hurrying back into the club. That man could move when he wanted to, racing to the door like a track star. I finished the cigarette and prayed that my 1972 Mustang would start. I had bought the car on impulse in Atlanta after returning to the States and had regretted it ever since. Well, I loved the look, and it was fun to drive, but the beast would sometimes leave me stranded, and it had been in the shop already. The last thing I wanted to do was ask Clovis for a ride home. Luck was with me, or God had finally listened to one of my pleas, because the engine roared when I turned the key. The radio was playing classic rock songs this afternoon, and the song that came on reminded me of when Hank and I used to park out by the lake. I turned on the wipers and through the periodic clearing of the windshield glanced to where Hank's F-150 had been parked. The truck was long gone. What had he been up to? It didn't matter. I wouldn't be seeing Hank again anytime soon if I could help it. I put the car in gear and headed through downtown Alpine, pleased to see a sign on an empty storefront next to the Pole and Arms, indicating that a new Chinese restaurant would be opening in a few weeks. The renovations had begun shortly before I moved home and apparently were going well. The street was flooded at the corner of Main and Maple, but I was able to slowly cruise through the intersection without killing the engine. I had just passed through the worst of it when my cell rang. The ringtone identified the caller as Mama, and I suddenly worried she had had trouble getting home. "Mama, are you all right?" I asked, after fumbling to answer. "Not at all, Gracie. I forgot Grandpa Mabel's cut glass platter." "What?" I thought I had misheard her. "Grandma Mabel's platter. I brought a plate of homemade peanut butter cookies to share at the club and used Grandma Mabel's platter. I can't believe I left it. Where is my memory gone? Can you pick it up?" "Mama, I'm almost home." Surely she wasn't that concerned about a plate. The woman sounded as worried as if she were missing a dog out in the storm. "It's the only thing left I have of hers. Well, besides the sideboard, and I guess the dining room table was hers as well, but neither are truly as special as that platter." I sighed, dreaming of melting into my turn-of-the-century clawfoot tub. The tub was so tall I could literally soak up to my eyebrows. And afterwards, I would curl up on the couch with a glass of Merlot and the Agatha Christie mystery I had picked up at a used bookstore in Gadsden. I had devoured all of the Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple mysteries in my teens, but somehow had missed the 4 Tommy and Tuppence books Christie had written. It felt like I had discovered a new Monet when I came upon them. "Can't it wait until tomorrow?" I pleaded. "Oh, well, that's okay, Gracie. You head on home," Mama continued. Her voice quavered, and I knew I was being played. "I had hoped to catch you before you left the club, but I guess I was too late. I'll just head back out in the storm and get it myself. I won't be able to sleep a wink until Grandma Mabel's platter is safe. To think, one of those thieving Mexicans over at the Carlisle could just simply walk into the club and take it." Inwardly, I groaned. I knew if I didn't retrieve the platter, Mama would do exactly what she had threatened and get back out in the storm. She had been fretting for weeks about the construction workers, despite the fact that none had ever entered the club, let alone stolen anything. Mama was convinced they were criminals simply because many of them looked Latino, and nothing I said to the contrary mattered. The inherent racism bothered me, but Mama wasn't about to change at her age. There was no way I could enjoy either bath or book now, not while worrying about Mama. Both luxuries would just have to wait a bit. I took a deep breath and said, "I'll get the platter. No need for you to get wet when I'm already soaked." "You're soaked? You should have worn a raincoat. Go on home and get dried off before you catch your death of cold. I'll go get it myself," said Mama. "No, Mama, I'll get the platter. No big deal," I growled. Here I was doing as she asked, and yet she had to almost make me beg to do it. The woman was a guilt-trip master. "Well, perhaps that would be best. Just be careful and get dry soon. Summer colds are the worst." We said our goodbyes, and I debated heading home to change first, but decided that was pointless. With the way the wind was blowing and the rain was pouring, even with a raincoat, anything dry I put on would be soaked the minute I stepped outside again. Instead, I looked for a good place to turn the Mustang around and wave as I circled the parking lot. She waved back, looking disappointed that I wasn't coming in for a late lunch, as I often did after a morning bridge game. The flooding at the corner of Main and Maple had lessened, but shortly after going through the intersection, I passed by a blue sedan that threw up enough water to make me curse. The Mustang sputtered as if the water had entered a fuel line, but thankfully did not die. I pulled up in front of the club, and there was not a car in sight. I waited until the rain slackened, and then made a dash for it. The front door was locked, but I knew there was a key beneath the doormat. The club was dark when I entered. I had no idea where the main light switches were located, so I pulled out my cell phone to light my way, carefully heading straight through the main playing area and around the dozen or so tables to the back hallway. The back hall led to the rear exit and the parking lot beyond, with mirrored bathrooms on the right and the kitchen and small office off to the left side. When I reached the kitchen, I tucked the cell back in my rear pocket and flipped on the kitchen light. The light revealed a man lying in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor. I was so shocked, my screech could have woken the dead. That's the end of chapter 1. Go buy Killer Lead on Amazon and see how the book turns out. And thank you for listening.